harbors that are normally free of ice, even in the middle of January, they're frozen up. Ships can't move over to Europe. Ships can't even move across the Hudson River to be delivering supplies. There is that. We are desperately short of coal because we've dug the coal out. It's ready to ship, but we've shut the railroads down because the weather is so terrible. And as you just think of the average citizen living through that, this is all stuff that would be pretty much, God, is tomorrow going to be even worse than today? Well, I think the weather forecast, to the limited extent we have it, is saying, yeah, it'd be worse. Oh no, what do we work through with all that is out there? Last pieces, and that's sort of the start of the next segment there. What else is bad news on the fatality list around the world in 1918, starting slightly in 1917? This is not people shooting each other with guns, artillery, or whatever else. The Spanish flu epidemic, which some estimate that kills 5 or 10 times as many people around the world as all of the combat casualties in the war. And this is still the major epidemic in the United States in the 1900 to 2000. And we hope that that continues to lead the track that is out there. And so you put all those pieces together, and you've got a very nervous November 1917 to June 1918, and it has started out in March of 1918 with the Germans pushing one more big offensive and making major progress in how they're gaining territory and how the Allies are holding up with it. And then we get to the last segment where the news, if you're an Allied supporter, gets good. Good things start happening, and as you look at the overall structure, a lot of it becomes, it's perfectly predictable that the Germans were just going to run out of troops, run out of food and starvation at home and everything else, run out of ambition to be running it. But it was a mighty close thing that the American troops started coming in just in the sufficient numbers. And probably one of my favorite quotes from a New York Times reporter there is General Pershing, the American general leading the forces, one of the first Americans over into Europe, taking a kind of grand tour at some of the major Paris sites, and everybody out showing, yay, the Americans are here, the Americans are here. And the Times quotes this one American as somebody, how impressive General Pershing looks, and very military and everything else. And the anonymous source there says, yeah, and behind him there are 10 million more. If the United States can supply that kind of troops, we're going to win the war. And in fact, that's what happens in the final sequence in the last couple of months. Particularly high casualties for the United States troops. Fair rookies in this and showing it some of what is there. It all comes together, and the Germans decide we need to ask for an armistice, which we hope will not turn into too punitive an exercise, but we simply cannot continue fighting. And if we do, we will have the Allied troops, including the French, operating in German territory, instead of the vast majority of the Western Front war that's taking place in Belgium and northern France. And that's a very lovely thing if you're able to be at home as a civilian and you don't have to worry about your house being bombed and your children killed and yourself or your spouse sent off to a labor camp to be helping out the German side. And November 11th, 1918, the armistice comes along, and then we take it through March the 5th as the Congress is finishing its work as we wrap up some of the business there we talked about in the introduction to the week. And the fun is then in what happens next as we track stuff along. Questions on any of the overview of the war piece there?
You said it was 50 votes in opposition to the National Declaration. As they wade through those that legislation you talked about, did it stay that strong majority, or did those 50 votes creep up on a number of those topics that you talked about?
Some of them crept up. Two particularly controversial ones, the draft.
Yeah.
Very controversial. And some of the Espionage Act. How much power are we giving Woodrow Wilson, much as we respect him? This is the president as dictator. And we have some of that framework today that we are working others. Let me piece then from there to some of what are the other controversies, what are the things that continue 100 years from now, or 100 years from 1980 to 1990. They're out there. Certainly mentioned some of them. One, the federal government becomes a much more significant presence in the life of the average American than it was then. And whether this is taxation, whether this is regulation, whether it is the size of the military, all of those are factors out there. And we continue to debate those. And here we have lots of issues on which this is a Republican, make America great again posture, this is a liberal democratic posture, and very, very different opinions on where some of that stuff should go. Secondly, what's the relationship between the president and the Congress? And for the most part, during the World War I experience, despite the differing opinions, the two parties worked together reasonably well. The two parties here, the executive president and then the Congress. Certainly not perfect. Certainly, despite a Wilson claim, politics is adjourned while we fight the war. Well, not entirely. And everybody is thinking ahead. We got the 1918 election, and we may then turn over to Congress control and all of the rest. That shows up pretty significantly there. Thirdly, as we've talked throughout, the average citizen's involvement in the war then, so much greater than today. And I suspect if we were to ask a group of other than veterans, spouses of veterans, people who have served themselves, and say, what are the tremendous changes in your life over the last 17 years that we've been fighting, in effect, a war in Afghanistan? Most of them would say, if you give me a couple of days, I think I can think of something that likely would have changed. Back then, running down the list of stuff there, who would not have been touched by this? The draft, that could be me, that could be my son, that could be my spouse, that could be my fellow worker, et cetera, et cetera. That's a big chunk of the American population that's there. The draft, or the taxes, and the bond campaigns and everything else, they're after my money and sometimes not being very subtle about doing it. Regulation, well, some of the most essential things in my life are there for regulation. Am I even free to talk about it? Well, maybe watch out for those Espionage Act provisions, because you may be drifting over. Your criticism of government suddenly is you are fighting the United States war effort, and we can punish you criminally for doing that. And as we also talk, the average citizen's involvement, one of the impressive pieces of World War I, lots of, needless to say, the less wealthy, less fortunate citizens serve. And typically the comment is, it's the generals and the politicians who decide when we fight, and then it's the average citizen who gets stuck with having to do the fighting. Well, this war, contrasting to probably the last 30 plus years of the United States, yes, you did have lots of all citizens out there fighting. Yes, you did have some privileged citizens escaping military service. But you also had an awful lot of them serving. And in some cases as eager volunteers, in some cases putting their life on the line. And I will just take a few of the examples, and then you can say who would be the comparator with the 1917, 1918 one that I'm offering, and who would be there today. And we'll start with one. The immediate past one, Mayor of New York City. A war fatality. Training for aircraft flight and messes up and he is killed. Wow, John Mitchell there. Secondly, one of the prominent members of Congress, 20 years service, major committee chair, everything else. He signs on, and as is going through training, comes down ill and dies. Augustus Gardner, and you could, who would be your comparator? Possibly Paul Ryan would have been a reasonable, in both in terms of age and in terms of leadership within Congress. There he is. Third piece, maybe the eminent or one of the eminent athletes around the country in 1917, 1918. A hockey player, and do we have any hockey fans in the crowd? Just one. Hobie Baker mean anything?
No.
No, darn it. That's the award.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's the award for the best college hockey player of the year. Hobie Baker, a Princeton graduate, superb hockey player, other athletic accomplishments as well, and he gets killed in the war. Aircraft, down he goes, there we are. And then maybe most significantly of all, Teddy Roosevelt, our favorite person in so many regards there. Teddy, and there's a wonderful segment in the paper where somebody accuses, a journalist, accuses Teddy of getting his son sort of privileged positions in the military. Safe, they're behind a desk, they don't have to worry about anything. And Teddy is absolutely contemptuous of that, having already 2 of his sons badly wounded in combat. Third one, Quentin, killed, his airplane goes down, and Teddy is, what do you think of this journalist? And Teddy is just beyond contempt for where this guy is. This is the President of the United States, and it's his kids that are dying as part of those Americans out there being killed. Other pieces, and I think the last of the fun of this, and we've talked about the non-war kinds of things, the flu, that probably you didn't expect. Some piece of the weather isn't out there. We've talked about the 2 great amendments. Here is women's suffrage. Here is prohibition. And 2 quick observations on the 2 amendments. One, prohibition at the time the battle over, we have nationwide prohibition going along, was a favorite topic and support of what we would now regard as a relatively liberal, progressive country. Alcohol is bad for people. Excessive drinking of alcohol is really bad for people. And if we could cut this out of the American experience, we would be a much better, safer, healthier American society. That's a slice of the prohibition debate that I had not realized was out there. The second piece was the women's suffrage amendment. And if anybody wants to get too, if you want to beat on the New York Times for any kind of reason, get a copy of the book and go back and read some of the New York Times' statements on should we have a federal constitutional amendment giving women suffrage. And the standard, and it may be, and they didn't identify the editorial writer, it may have been the same editorial writer consistently coming down, short version of his, and I assume it is his, version of this, is here are these silly ladies asking for the right to vote when we've got this incredibly important war going on. Women, give us a break. And I leave it to you, which was the more important decision of those days that are out there. With that, questions, comments, reactions?
I was really interested to hear about how late conscription happens. My mother's father served in World War I, and I did the math just a little while ago because I was trying to figure out, how old was he? And I came up with he was 37 years old when he went over, and he was a physician already. He had posts in hospitals. And I know what the date was because he was in Europe when my mother and her twin sister were born in December 1917. So does it make sense that there's a adult professional volunteering sometime before November 2017?
Yeah, the original draft age, 21 to 30, late while the war is still going on, we expand that to 18 to 45. And that, oh my goodness, that takes an enormous portion of people. But even before then, you had all variety of volunteers, and particularly the medical profession. I think having a sense of, I may hate war, but probably the best thing I can contribute is let's see if we can keep people alive as they are out there. And my guess that would be a lot of the military medical people who were there. And it's fun as we talk about, here was the family experience, and where was that? And I had, one of the great regrets of my life was I had a step-grandfather who had served in the war, I think went over as probably a draftee. And I was still too young and too embarrassed to want to talk to him about it. And he assuredly did not, no, let me tell you about my time in the trenches kind of stuff. And man, some of the memories there that are lost. And happily, numbers of the authors in our great collection of the 190 or so World War I books that we have now split between University of Maine and University of Maine at Prescott are soldier after soldier after soldier after sailor after airman memories of the war. And this is what we went through today as we went up, and it is just fascinating reliving that experience through their eyes.